Still waking up.
Yeah, me too, man.
A lot going on today. So, go on.
How's it going, man? How's your holidays?
It was good, man. It was, it's it's kind of hectic. It's always hectic. The holidays are very stressful, and then when they're not stressful, you got family, you're around, everything, and you just kind of want it all to end. Sadly, you want it all to end.
Yeah, I feel
Remember
that.
you're a kid, right? You were like, man, I wish it would last longer. I don't want to go back to school. And then now, now it's different. So it's
you're ready to just relax. But so Bellator just had a big fight recently. What are your thoughts on the Fedor and Rampage fight?
Big John and I talked about this on our show on weighing in, and we just it's one of those throwback fights. The legacy of both guys is out there. It was just one of those fights that I think people would wanted to see, obviously, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But the fact is that it never was able to get put together. The same thing with Randy and Fedor. That fight should have happened. Other fights with Fedor should have happened also, but the UFC had put a stop to some of them. Randy being the one that everyone had talked about for the longest time. But Rampage, and when he left Pride, went over to the UFC, that fight could never have happened then. It's just one of those situations where now it's available. We were able to see it now. I mean, it obviously wasn't the fight that everyone wanted to see during this time. But the good thing is we finally got to see it for everyone out there that wanted to see that type of fight. We finally got to see it. The other thing too is not even so much that it's that fight. I think more of the fact that Bellator, Scott Coker, Bellator has had a relationship with the Japanese for the longest period of time, and we are now able to have cross-promotion fights. Now, I've said this for the longest time. I would love for the UFC and Bellator to do cross-promotion. I would love for the UFC and watch. I would like for the UFC for them to, cross-promote either with Ryzen or with Bellator. I think for sure Bellator would be interesting because I'd love to see Patricio fight Volkanovski. I'd love to see, Patricio fight anybody, really, just any of those guys. Even at 155, I'd like to see him fight some guys there. Lima obviously fighting like Usman or Colby. It's just the cross promotion between Bellator and Ryzen. It just sets the standard, I think, for moving forward. It starts putting a little more pressure on the UFC as well as the UFC and in other promotions like on just cross promoting. Like, hey, let's have your guys fight our guys. We're not saying we have to have champion versus champion. Let's not fuck up each other's promotions by doing that. But let's see what happens. Let's have them fight. Let's say our number 4 guy versus your number 5 guy, or, whatever it is. I talked about this a little bit. I would love to see MVP versus Stephen Thompson. Let's have that fight happen. You know what I mean? Like those fights out there that we can have. It doesn't need to be champion versus champion. Let's save that type of stuff. Sure, I bring up Patricio because to me, he's like the longest standing pillar in Bellator. He's the first double champ kind of thing, or second actually, but he's there on that level of like, these are the guys that I would like to see him fight. The speed, the power, all those things that he possesses. I'd love to see him fight, obviously, someone else. But I understand the champion versus champion, it causes like a conflict of interest. We don't want to see those guys lose. Now all of a sudden your promotion is looked down upon. But we could always have guys like MVP versus Stephen Thompson. That fight makes a ton of fucking sense, right? I mean, it just makes sense. Look, Mousasi's not the champion right now. Let's have Mousasi versus, Darren Till or Gastelum or something like that. You know what I mean? Like the guys that are champions. Like that makes so much sense. Let's fucking see those type of fights.
Do you think that Bellator and UFC will ever get to that point?
I don't think it's going to be while Dana's still under that whole thing. While Dana still tries to run the show there, I don't think it'll ever happen. No. He learned his lesson a little bit. Big John and I talked about this. When he sent over Chuck to Pride and Chuck beat Alistair Overeem, knocked him out, and then ends up losing to Quentin in the next round. It put a little bit of a bad taste in his mouth because he never got anything back. He never got another Pride fighter over to UFC. Japan kind of stuck it to him. But you got to remember at the time, though, the UFC needed Pride at that time. because the UFC was not the big dog in town. Pride was the big dog in town.
Yeah.
Pride was the number one promotion at the time in the world. And so when he sent him over there, he was expecting to get Vanderlei back and have him fight in a cage or somebody back over there, and never got that opportunity or chance. So when that didn't happen, I think he's just like, you know what, fuck it, I'm never doing that again. I'm never cross promoting, you know. And it's funny that has happened because a very similar type situation happened with the, you know, Strikeforce, when Strikeforce was Strikeforce, and Dream. And Gilbert Melendez was supposed to fight Aoki. They sent Aoki over to fight Gil for the title. And Gil beat him. And when it was time for us to send Gil over there, Gil either got hurt or just didn't want to go, or whatever the situation was. And I ended up taking the fight on 2 weeks' notice. It was like 12 days or something like that. I was supposed to fight Aoki. Then I got into Japan, and they said, hey, we'll pay you a little bit more, but we want you to fight Kawajiri. And I was like, all right, well, I guess, all right, here we go. This is natural, though. I want you guys to understand. This is natural dealing with the Japanese. Like, when you go there, you should expect your opponent to change, you know, when you get there. You know, and if it doesn't change, then you're one of the lucky ones. But just know that they've already, your opponent has been training for you for 12 weeks. When in the meantime, you've been training for somebody else.
Yeah.
But look, this is part of that whole scenario of this is part of the gamesmanship from the Japanese and how they do business, you know, but the thing is, we know that going into it. If you have ever talked to anyone that fought in Pride or fought in Dream, or, you know, like including myself, I mean, my opponent changed when I fought in Pride. My opponent changed like 6 or 7 times, and eventually at the end of the day, I ended up fighting the guy that originally had offered me. That's how crazy it was. And when I showed him to the weigh-ins, he was fucking shredded. He was fucking ripped. I was like, dude, there's no way you didn't know we weren't fighting for fun. It's just good. It's funny. It sucks for the fighter that's coming from overseas, you know, to deal with that type of situation in that scenario. But that's gamesmanship on their part. Not to mention, they pay very well over there. And I also would like to remind people that there's fighters in this world. Like, you know, I worked with Rich Franklin at ONE FC for a while doing commentary. And he always wished that he had fought over in Pride. You know what I mean? Like, sure, he fought in Japan, but he always wished that to hear Lenny Hart call him and announce his name, and, you know, and all these things. Like, people don't realize how fucking awesome that is. You walk down and you see, like, Lenny Hart is, like, screaming your name at the top of her lungs. And it's phenomenal, man. Like, I've been blessed enough to have her call my name, you know, several times. And but she's amazing, man. She's absolutely amazing. Anyways, just to get off on that tangent, like, it just would be nice if we could see cross promotion more often. And like I said, it doesn't have to be your champ versus our champ. Let's do it where we just say, hey, what are the fights that people are clamoring about? And what fight? Like, to me, it's MVP versus Stephen Thompson would be a great fight. You know, I would love to see that type of fight, like those kind of guys. I mean, who else could we? I mean, like, if you think, I'd love to see Lima and Masvidal. I mean, I know Lima's our champion, but to me, like, that would be that's a bad motherfucker fight. You know what I mean? Like, I'd love to see that kind of fight. A guy with both of them have power, both of them good takedown defense, both of them good wrestling. I think Masvidal has the edge probably on the wrestling, but I would give Lima the edge on the submissions, and I would give Lima the edge on the leg kicking power. I give Masvidal the hand speed, but I give probably Lima the more power in the punching. But it would make for a great fight and good cross promotion. I mean, let's run it back. Let's see Daly and Masvidal again at 170. Let's see that fight.
Two different fighters now.
Yeah, there's fights to be had out there. You know, Lorenz Larkin could fight either Colby Covington. You know, if we're not using champions, let's have him fight Colby Covington. Let's go Lorenz Larkin and maybe Robbie Lawler. That'd be a fucking fun fight. I mean, let's see the speed versus the power, you know, that kind of thing. I mean, there's fights out there to be had that we don't need to have the best fight the best, you know, the champion versus champion. Maybe occasionally we throw one in there. We say, hey, we're getting so much talk and so much hype, you know, like there was a lot of talk about Patricio and Max Holloway. To me, that fight didn't favor Patricio that much because of the reach and the range. But if you put him versus Volkanovski, that to me intrigues me more because they both have power. They're both little stumps. You know, they're both very explosive. They both have good conditioning, good cardio. I mean, there's things that I'd favor Volkanovski over Patricio, but there's a lot of things I would favor Patricio over Volkanovski. But that fight to me makes a lot of sense. We throw one of those little fights in there. We're like, okay, hey, let's have this fight. And what I like with what Ryzen did with Bellator is Horiguchi beat Darren Caldwell for the title. Then he never was able to defend it because he got injured twice. But the reality of it is that he then became the Bellator champion, and Bellator was trying to get him to have a fight over in the States. He got injured, and so what he did very nicely was like, hey, I'm going to relinquish the belt. My knee's messed up. I might be out for 6 to 8 months. I'll come back and I'll get it again. Not a big deal. He'll get an automatic title shot when he comes back because that's how Scott is. But I think that is a good idea for if you win the title or you beat the guy that's the champion over in the other show, then now that person can be active in both organizations.
Yeah. One that has been talked about for years would be Chandler and Khabib. How would you see that going?
Yeah, I mean, look, I know I work for Bellator and I'm on that, but look, Khabib's one of my closest friends. Also, Khabib is all the things that all of Chandler's weaknesses and all of Chandler's strengths, Khabib does, and he does them better. Khabib's a better wrestler. Khabib's got better cardio. Khabib's shown that he's got better cardio and conditioning. Striking and stand-up, I would probably give the edge a little bit more towards Chandler, like with the speed and the power. But the overall wrestling and pressure and position and all the things that Chandler does to set up his takedowns and his wrestling, there'd be no concern, I think, for Khabib at all. I would like to see Chandler fight somebody else. Then, like him versus Tony Ferguson would probably be a good fight. Would make a little bit more sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I like him and Poirier too.
Yeah, I would probably lean more towards Poirier more towards Chandler over Poirier. Stylistically, I would see that fight. I would probably see Chandler potentially beating him. Just the speed, the power, the wrestling, all those things. And not by much, though. That's the thing. It's not by much. If Dustin was to be able to touch his chin, you never know. It changes the dynamic of the fight. But let me give you another fight. For instance, Brent Primus. Brent Primus fought a really good fight, a tough fight against Chandler, had him rocked a couple times. Even in their second fight, beat him the first fight, legit beat him. I'd like to see him versus Dustin Poirier. Submission threat on the bottom, good punching power, good conditioning, good cardio, and I got to tell you, just massive for the weight. Huge weight. Like, he's really big. He's probably walking like 185, 190. Dustin Poirier is no small fry either. I trained with Dustin a couple times out in New Jersey when he was helping Frankie Edgar train for Benson Henderson. And when I trained with him for that fight, he was fighting at 145, but walking around 180 something. And I was fighting at 155, and I was walking around like 172. This kid's fighting at 45 and 15 pounds heavier than me. 10 to 15 pounds heavier. That's insane to me. Absolutely just insane. But that fight, Brent Primus and him, makes for a very exciting fight. I would love to see that fight. I mean, like, there's just guys that I would like to see. Patricio, Patricio fighting any of the guys at 155. I just think stylistically at 155, he'd have a hard time with the guys at 155 in the UFC because he's not a big guy. I mean, if you look at him and I stand next to him, I mean, I think I'm a whole head above him. You know what I mean? Which is there, but he's got the power, man. That's the one thing he's got. He's got the speed, the power. And if you watch his last fight when he fought Juan Archuleta, who was on a 19-fight win streak, and trains with TJ Dillashaw and Cub Swanson and all those guys, phenomenal shape. He just didn't have the wrestling to get him down. And I believe, Juan's wrestled at Purdue and has really good wrestling. Just didn't have what it took to get him down. And so guys at 155, I mean, outside of Khabib, the guys at 155, I don't know if they'd be able to take him down. He legit, Juan got in on some real legit like takedowns, and Patricio was able to stop those takedowns. He's just, ever since he started training with Henry Cejudo, his wrestling and Eric Albertson, as soon as he started training with those guys all the time, his level of wrestling just jumped through the roof. So stylistically, matching him up against anybody in the 155-pound division, I think he'd have a good shot at them because of the speed and the power and his wrestling takedown defense. it just concerns me as the fight goes on in those championship rounds with guys that are that big. You know, I mean, Khabib cuts from, 185, 188, somewhere in there. Islam Makhachev, same thing. Kevin Lee's a really big guy as well. I mean, these guys are massive, man. Like when they get around these guys, they're huge. So it doesn't favor him, I think, to fight at 55 as much as it does at 45.
Speaking of Patricio, do you think Chandler would deserve a rematch with him?
No, not at all. It'd be one thing if it was like a hard fought decision and they went on and went on. But first off, if you got dropped by a guy that's at 145 pounds, you don't deserve that title shot. You got knocked out. Like that just doesn't work that way. I mean, had it been a hard fought fight and they went back and forth for 3 or 4 rounds, Patricio caught him in an exchange and probably finished him, I would probably say, yeah, or if Patricio was losing those 3 or 4 rounds, I would say, yeah, and then just caught him and then knocked him out. But that was never the case. The fight was over before it started. I mean, he touched him on the chin and put him down, and, and the rest of it is history.
Do you feel like it was an early stoppage?
Or no, it wasn't. It wasn't an early stoppage at all. He wasn't defending himself. And it really just comes down to, like, look, the refs, when I talked to Big John and you would talk to Big John said it wasn't an early stoppage. It wasn't an early stoppage because there was a moment there where his body went limp. That's all the ref needs to see.
Yeah.
Once you stop defending yourself, it doesn't make – we've seen it. It happened to me. I got dropped by Hermes Franca. My body went limp. I went limp and just basically face planted into the canvas. But as soon as I hit the canvas, it woke me up, and I was able to, like, grab the legs, come back up, and try to fight from that position. But your body is out. Your brain's shut off for that split second. And so I think that no, I don't. I think no, he doesn't deserve a rematch right away. I think he's got to get another win. I mean, had he beat Benson, I could potentially see him fighting for the rematch then. But no, beating Sidney Outlaw the way he beat Sidney Outlaw on a last-minute replacement kind of thing, I don't think so.
Well, the UFC has a big fight coming up in a couple of weeks. How do you have the Conor Cowboy fight going?
I think as the fight goes into the championship rounds, I favor Cowboy if he can get it that far. The straight left, the body kicks, those are the two things that have kind of always been a little bit of Cowboy's weaknesses. He's fought left-handed guys before, and he's kind of struggled with them. From Pettis to Benson to those guys, like he's struggled with those guys. Nate Diaz, he struggled with those guys. The guys that are left-handed, the guys that throw a lot of body kicks, he's had a hard time with. And those are all things that Conor does very well. But I also think that if he wants an opportunity and a chance to get that win, he needs to wear on him. I want to say Cowboy's 6 foot, 6'1".
Yeah, he's a tall guy.
I'm not saying he needs to try to force the takedown. What I'm saying, though, is that he needs to threaten it a little bit, and he also needs to get into that clinch and put his body weight on him against the fence. Make him carry his weight. Take some steam off of his punches and his kicks. Those, to me, that to me is a very important element of how Cowboy fights this fight. If he can press Conor to the fence and potentially, like, hang on him, get on his head, try to, clinch him a little bit, dirty box him a little bit, knee him. What Cowboy does really well off the break is he throws that head kick off the break. I think that'd be another thing he should do. There's things in there that he does very well that I could see him winning the fight, but he's got a tough task of getting him out of there or carrying him into that second and third round, towards the end of second and third round. Conor, I think, will for sure slow down as the fight goes on. And in that third and that fourth round is when we're going to see how much he slows down, though. John Kavanaugh, who just so happens to be good friends with myself and Big John, he says he looks phenomenal, says he's actually carrying the weight very well and is in phenomenal shape. I'm always a little hesitant to believe coaches because they don't always tell the truth. But they want to believe in their mind. They want to believe that their fighter is looking phenomenal and feeling great. But are they really? When it comes out to the real fight, are they really? And Conor has shown against guys like Nate Diaz in the fourth and fifth round, he slows down a lot in comparison to when he fights in the first and second round.
Yep. We talked about a little bit of cross promotion. If you could pick any two fighters from all time, who would you love to see fight with no organization?
I mean, there should have been the Fedor and Randy fight should have happened from back in the day. there's just tons of fights that could have potentially have happened. I mean, I would even like to see some that just run back. You know, I would always love to see the Dan Henderson and Vanderlei fight. Love to see that fight over and over again. Yeah, I don't know, man. There's just so many fights that I honestly, for myself, you know, all I had heard when I was with Strikeforce was like, oh, I'd love to see Josh Thomson fight Anthony Pettis or Cowboy Cerrone. But then when the UFC bought the Strikeforce, it was never even an option. It was never presented to me like, hey, let's have you fight one of these guys. I understood the Pettis one because Pettis became champion shortly after I had got there in beating Benson. But the Cowboy fight was never offered, and I would have loved to have had that fight as well. You know, there was fights out there that, you know, we could have potentially have done. But, I mean, geez, man, there's a lot of good fights that could have happened. You know, I mean, I really would like to have seen the Cain Velasquez and Stipe fight whilst Cain was in his prime. You know, I would like to have seen that fight. No, that's not a cross-promotion fight, but I would like to have seen Cain and Fedor as well. You know, Fedor to me has the edge on the submission game over Cain. I think the speed and the power would have went to Fedor as well, but the wrestling and the conditioning and the cardio and the pace, I think, would have went to Cain. And it would have been a great fight, man. I would have loved to have seen that fight as well. So there's a lot of good fights I could go back and think about. And, you know, a young and prime Jose Aldo against a Patricio would be fucking awesome.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Well, so there's fights out there. You kind of caught me off guard with the question, so I'm not sure. You know, I would have loved to have seen, you know, shit. I mean, who's the champ right now? I would have loved to have seen like a young and in shape. If I would have seen here the BJ Penn that fought Sean Shirk and fought Kenny Florian and fought Joe Daddy Stevenson, if we would have seen that BJ Penn fight Khabib, that would have been a good fight. Because BJ he just was so able to stop people's takedowns, and with the flexibility, the balance that he had on one leg. You know, I think BJ probably would have given Khabib some fits in his prime. The in shape BJ Penn, the one that fought, like I said, Kenny Florian and Sean Shirk. I think that BJ Penn would give, and plus the punching power, would have given Khabib a hard time. I'm not saying he would have beat Khabib, but I think it would have still been stylistically a very fun match.
Speaking of Khabib, somebody on here said, well, and it's been rumored for the past year or so, but GSP and Khabib, how would you see that fight going down?
You know, I've been saying that for a while. I think GSP will come out of retirement and fight Khabib. If Khabib, I think if he finishes Ferguson or he annihilates him, I think GSP will fight Khabib. I don't know if it'll be at 55 or if it'll be at 70 or if it'll be at a catchweight. I don't believe that anywhere in there that they're interested in doing a catchweight. So I think with Khabib, it's up to him. I know that his father really, really wants that fight for him. And you got to think, and I said this probably, I don't know, I said this probably 2 or 3 years ago. But I said, to me, the greatest of all time will be Khabib if he finishes his career undefeated. He's in the toughest weight class. He's fighting the toughest guys. And if he has 2 or 3 more title defenses, let's just say he beats Tony, right? After he beats Tony, and he turns around and he beats GSP, he's got nothing else to prove. He can retire and be considered the greatest of all time. Over John Jones, over all these guys, he would be considered the greatest. If he beats Tony and he beats him handily, and then he turns around and he beats GSP, I think he's the greatest of all time. I don't think he's the GOAT.
Do you think he beats Tony? How do you see that fight playing out?
I think outside of a cut, or unless he makes a mistake and gets caught with a submission somehow, some way. I just don't see it, given that he's very well versed in submissions. You know, I mean, Sambo has an extensive submission game. You know, involved in it. He's been like he is. We had him on our podcast twice already, and both times, I mean, he had talked about how he's got, you know, in Sambo he's got over 250 fights. You know, that's before he even had MMA fights. Yeah. I mean, Sambo was really just MMA with the gi top on. You know, so when you're talking in terms of, do I think he'd be fine? I think submission-wise, he'll be fine. The only issue that I see with him submission-wise is sometimes he knows that he can get out, and he sometimes hangs out there sometimes. And that may cause a little, not understanding how long and lanky Tony is, like thinking that you're safe, you're not always safe. That may cause a little bit of an issue, but I don't think he's going to take Tony for granted at all. He understands Tony's game very well. We've trained for him 4 or 5 times already by now, so he understands what he needs to do. You know, he understands what he needs to do. So, I mean, he's already reached out to me, not just specifically for training for jiu-jitsu and grappling and all those things, but just to kind of hang out and be in, you know, on the inside, like, hey, like, what do you feel? What can he do well? And, you know, we've already talked about all this, you know, as far as what he needs to do to get the win. And I think he's more than capable of doing it all. I don't think Tony beats him outside of a cut and the potential of like possibly catching him with an elbow or a submission, just fluke. I wouldn't say fluke, but just something you wouldn't expect is the way that I see him potentially losing. That'd be it though.
Yeah, let's just say if he does lose, what's next for him? Has he said anything about anything?
No, I don't even, that's not even in the conversation.
Okay.
I think for us, I don't think there's any way that he loses. I mean, outside of, like I said, getting a cut or something like that along the lines, I don't see it happening. I don't see it happening at all. I think the grinding, the power, just the pace. I mean, Tony doesn't tend to get tired, but I mean, we saw when Kevin Lee was feeling good in that first round. I mean, he was having his way with Tony, you know, and I expect Khabib to be very similar. You know, to have his way with Tony, and as the fight goes on, you know, just dominate the fight, and then Tony will tend to, I'm not saying he's going to slow down, but he definitely isn't going to pick up the pace in the 4th and 5th round. Khabib will stay steady through the whole thing, if not get stronger.
I believe it was, the 3rd round in the Conor fight. Do you think he lost that round, or?
Yeah, I mean, like, it depends on it. It was a close round, and yeah, I mean, I would say I can see how he lost the round. It was close. I mean, he just didn't do as much as he normally would have. But you got to recall how the 2nd round ended. The second round ended with him trying to get him out of there. I mean, he threw everything he had in that last 30 seconds of trying to finish him, you know. And Conor just stayed in the fetal position and wasn't able to stop anything he did. So he just covered up and hung in tough and got to the 3rd round. And I think Khabib just kind of like slowed the pace down in the 3rd. And he had the potential, I think, of getting him out of there in the 3rd had he tried to push it, but he just didn't. He let Conor, you know, move around the cage. He still pushed. It was back and forth, but I can see why the judges gave it to Conor.
Yeah.
But think about it.
Yeah.
28 and 0.
Yeah.
He's lost one round. He's lost 1 round. You know, and I'm not trying to knock. I don't want to lean too much towards Khabib, even though he's my teammate and we train together. But Conor did a lot of really good things that people don't give him credit for. You know, he picked up a couple takedowns. He was able to kind of get back to his feet several times. You know how many guys have tried to do that against Khabib? Never been as successful. You know, so Michael Johnson couldn't get back up. You know, Barboza couldn't get back up. And their whole purpose in life is to get back up, and they couldn't do it. Conor McGregor was able to stop a couple takedowns, and when he did get taken down, he was able to also get back to his feet, but he got taken back down. But he was able to get back to his feet, you know, and that's more than a lot of guys have been able to do against Khabib. So I give him a lot of credit in the scenario and the situation he was in.
If Conor gets past Cowboy and then whoever he has next, he's called out so many different people, but do you, I know Khabib doesn't want it, but do you think Conor would get the rematch?
No, I don't think he will. No, I think honestly at this stage, Khabib calls the shots. You know, he's also one of those guys. People don't seem to get it. Like he's already beat him, and how else can he beat him even better? I mean, he subbed him with like not even really a real submission. He subbed him with a jaw lock. I mean, these are things that, like, in Khabib's mind, like, this guy doesn't belong in the cage with me. He needs to earn his way back, and it doesn't benefit him at all to fight him and rematch him, knowing that he's already tapped him and beat him. And he beat him pretty handily in the first 2 rounds. You know, he took the 3rd round off, got the finish in the 4th. He knows what he needs. You know, like his goal right now is to fight GSP. I think. I don't think he'll fight Usman because Usman is managed by the same guy that he's managed by Ali. Yeah. And there's no reason for them to fight right now. I think if it hadn't been Colby Covington, I think Khabib, I can see Khabib going up to fight Colby because I think Khabib could beat Colby. And I think Khabib could beat Usman also. I think he could beat both those guys. And that fight, I think if there was another fight to be had after he fights Tony, I think it would only be GSP. He would call the shot. Now, as far as Conor, if he beats Cowboy, I think the only fight that he has really would be like, does he want to stay at 170 and fight Usman? I think he'd be better off fighting Masvidal, because I think, to me, that is a fight that more people would want to see. Him fighting Usman doesn't do anything for it. Doesn't do it. If he does fight Usman, he does beat him, I think then that guarantees him a title shot against Khabib, because Khabib, I think, will come up and fight him again at 170.
You think Khabib? Do you feel like he'll jump up to 170, or do you think he'll retire?
I think he would. I think he would, only based on the fact that he already knows that he can beat Conor, and find him at 170 would be an easier fight for him, I think. Less of a weight cut. You get more of the natural Khabib. He'll also be walking around more of what his natural size is. When he first comes to the gym, he's always already in shape. He's phenomenal at that weight class. He carries that weight a lot. He carries that weight wonderfully. Like, he can walk around at 180 something and still fight like he's a lightweight. So I think if Conor was to go to 170 and fight Usman, they wouldn't get as many views, so he probably wouldn't make as much money, but he'd become the champion at 170. I think there's a good chance of him beating Usman. It'd be a tough fight still, but I think there's a chance of him beating Usman. But then if he did beat Usman, because that's Ali's guy, I think Khabib would step up and say, like, hey, I want that fight again now at 170 for 2 titles. I think outside of that, it would just be Khabib versus GSP, and it would be Conor versus Masvidal.
Switching the gear to your fighting career, do you plan on getting back in the cage?
We'll see, man. There was a lot of talk about me fighting Gilbert Melendez. We'll see what happens. I mean, Gil needs to sit down with Scott Coker, and they need to try to come to terms on what the contract will be. I don't know. I have only interest in one fight, and that's the fight with Gil. I have no interest in any other fight at all. So if that fight doesn't come about, then I'm fine with just, not really announcing retirement, just kind of like walking off into the sunset kind of thing, and being good with where I'm at. I mean, I love doing the commentary. I love being an announcer. I love calling all these fights. I love seeing the young talent that we have in Bellator, especially in the UK series where I mainly call all the fights cage side. I mean, it's absolutely phenomenal, man. We have a lot of young, good, upcoming, talented fighters that are getting better every time they fight. So I'm excited for these guys. I'm excited for watching them. As far as me fighting, it's Gil or it's not. There's no fight. So if Gil wants to smoke, he can come get it. So I mean, I understand though. Like, I talked to him in Hawaii, and such a good guy, man. Him and his wife both. I mean, been friends with him for years. I know we fought 3 times, but I think he's got to get the numbers right for himself. And if he can't do that, then that's then I understand. But if he does, then hey, look, just so he knows, I'm ready to do it.
Yeah. Someone kind of in the same boat as you is John Fitch. Do you feel like he deserves Lima next? And do you think he beat McDonald?
Yeah, I feel like he does. I feel like maybe if you give him somebody like MVP, or if you give him somebody else like Larkin, or you give him somebody else as another name, give him one fight, see if you get through it. Maybe you give him Derek Anderson. Like Derek Anderson was supposed to fight MVP. Maybe you give him a fight like that, to get him a win instead of just a draw, and then you have him fight Lima at the end of that. I mean, I kind of feel like he should be put in there right now. But it's not my call, man. It's the promotions business, not my business.
Yeah, I had him on a month probably so ago. He said he's basically what you're saying about Gilbert. He said if he don't get Lima, he's just going to walk off. Yeah.
I mean, I understand what he's saying. I mean, I feel like they should offer it to him because, he had a draw and he should have went on, I don't know, man. I don't know. It's hard for me to say, but it's business. At the end of the day, the other thing though too is he's going to defend the title. It's hard for a promotion to say, hey, we're going to have you fight, and if you do win, are you going to give us 2 or 3 more fights? Probably not. You're probably just going to win and then bounce, and now I end up with a vacant title. Not one promotion in the world wants to do that.
Do you feel like you beat McDonald, or do you feel like it wasn't?
No, I didn't feel. I felt like it was a draw. I really did feel like it was a draw, and the thing was, the way he did it, it wasn't pretty, and so a lot of people were going to say that McDonald should have won, or I just felt it was a draw. I really did feel. I don't think there was one of the rounds that should have been a 10-8 round, and I can see how he lost that way, but yeah, I was happy with it being a draw, unfortunately.
Yeah. Speaking of McDonald, he just signed with PFL. What are your thoughts about that?
I think it's a good place for him. I think he right now he's at the end of his career, or not. I wouldn't say the end of his career. He's at a stage in his career where he's trying to get the money grab, and the money grab is to make as much money as you possibly can, and bounce out. And that's what he needs to do. His wife just had their second baby, I believe. So they have 2 kids now. And, and I think it's that part in his career. It's like, look, it's time for me to start making as much money as I possibly can and settling in to life at home with the kids and the family and living that lifestyle.
What made you want to get into like being an analyst and commentary and all that?
I did it for Strikeforce a couple times, calling fights cage side, and then ONE FC offered me a job, and I worked over at ONE FC for about 2 years. I was calling some fights over there, and I really enjoyed it. I jumped into that with really no preparation, and I felt that it was going well. We just, I didn't live in Singapore. I wasn't going to move to Singapore, and had I lived in Singapore, I probably would have loved to have stayed doing it, and they probably would have kept me on. But it didn't work. I think expense-wise, it was quite expensive to fly me back and forth from the States to Singapore. And I noticed that everyone else that worked for the company lived in Singapore. They lived in outlying countries that were a lot closer by, that were easier and cheaper to fly people in and out of. Rich Franklin moved out there eventually. Matt Hume, he's in Seattle, so he's the only one that really flies, I think, back and forth. But he's also like the president of the whole company. Outside of you, Matt Hume is a big voice in that organization, and that kind of was what got my feet wet. I enjoyed doing it cage side when I was with Strikeforce, and then I definitely enjoyed it with ONE FC. And when Bellator asked me if I wanted to do it, and from what I understand, there was a lot of people that worked for the production side of the company that I had never met, but they had known of me because they worked for the UFC doing production for them. They worked for Strikeforce back in the day doing production. And they said they always thought that I would be good at this. And so they had threw my name out there, and I went in, did a reading, called a couple fights, through a teleprompter kind of thing, or through a screen, and just called those fights. And when I called those fights, boom. They hit me up and said, hey, would you want to do this? And yeah, they signed me to a long-term deal. So I'm still doing that. I love it. I absolutely fucking love it.
We talked about cross promotion earlier, but do you think we see another MMA trade like we did with Askren and
I do know. I'll give you guys the insight on this. There was a little bit of talk. People may not know this, but there was talk between Bellator and the UFC about potentially trading Cain Velasquez. So there was talk. There was talk that there was maybe going to be a trade where we would give you 2 guys, and then we would have got like Cain, I think, during that time. There was talk. It was a little bit of a buzz, but it never really came to fruition. But there was like, hey, would you guys be interested? It was right around that time that they did the Ben Askren trade with ONE. So I do know that the UFC is open for business that way. And I had called for something like this. I said, you're going to start seeing, like right before the Ben Askren trade and the Demetrius Johnson trade happened, I basically said, I'm like, you're going to start seeing promotions like teams, like football teams and baseball teams start trading their assets. Like, hey, this guy, we feel like he's not an asset anymore. He's just being disruptive in the company. Let's trade him and let's get something back for him. It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. And I think I'm excited. Like, I want to see more of that happening. Yeah. If he's going to be locked down to a company like they are, at least have the option to be traded somewhere else.
Do you know what the return would have been for Cain?
No idea.
No idea?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I do believe it was going to be 2 fighters, though. I don't know who it was, but from what I understand, it was going to be 2 fighters. So 2 fighters from Bellator for Cain Velasquez. There was, like I said, though, it was a real quick conversation of like, hey, there is talk, like we can do a trade. And then shortly after that, we saw ONE do the trade with the UFC. So we do know that the UFC is open for business when it comes to things like that, which is kind of cool. I think that's great.
That's amazing.
Out and through the fans of excitement.
Yeah. Do you think Ryan Bader would still hold up well in the UFC against the top heavyweights?
Yeah, look, I think he'll always have a hard time with guys like with John Jones. The length, the reach, the wrestling, the explosiveness, all that stuff. John's a fit for anyone, just like Anderson Silva was, just like MVP is. Stephen Thompson. The long, lengthy, rangy kind of guys with good kicks and good jabs and all those things, They're going to be hard. They're hard to take down. Izzy, same thing. You know, that style of fighter is going to always be hard to deal with. So John, I think Ryan Bader would have a hard time with him, but I think Ryan Bader beats Stipe. I think he beats him easily. He beats him. I think he just pushes the pace, gets in his grill. They've trained together. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like, you know, if he just pushes the pace on the wrestling, starts guessing, Stipe slows down dramatically, you know, by the second and third round. You try to stop a couple takedowns, you get tired. I think it's done by then.
We got a couple fan questions, and one is from Strongest Bloke in My House, and it said, if you had to go to war and take a former opponent as your backup / sidekick, who would you take?
Probably Tony Ferguson. He's out there doing that training, that fucking ninja training that no one knows about. Fuck. I don't know what he does, man, but he's fucking phenomenal. And if I had to go to war with one guy that I'd fought, like him or it'd probably be him or Gil. I mean, Gil's always been a good friend of mine, and you know, we've hung out together outside and, you know, at some nightclubs and stuff. And we've had to have each other's back a couple times, you know. And so I know he's down to throw down, and so I would say probably him. You know, either Gil and, you know, or Tony, because Tony's just fucking batshit crazy, but fucking fun. I think just willing to throw down and just gangster as fuck.
Well, I don't really know what the question is, but Insta Reeves MMA on here said, ask him about his bout with Nate Diaz. But I mean, yeah, the question. What about?
I would imagine, like, you know, about it. It was a good fight, man. Like, game plan wise, we had a good game plan. I'd taken the game plan from what Carlos Condit did to Nick Diaz, and how Benson had fought, how GSP and how Carlos Condit fought Nick Diaz. And I took how Benson fought Nate Diaz, and I just took all three of those game plans and I just made them into my own and try to mimic it. I also noticed that every time someone switched to southpaw on him, he kind of slowed down. He took a step back. He didn't throw punches or anything like that. So when people switched on him, it kind of made him freeze a little bit and rethink what was going on. So that's why I spent a lot of time switching back and forth, you know, and it worked to my benefit.
Speaking of Nate, how do you feel about, one, the BMF title, and two, the doctor stoppage on it?
I thought it was a bad doctor stoppage because we've seen Nate fight through more, and like John McCarthy had said, like, that cut, sure, it looked bad, but it wasn't in a position where it would have caused any eye damage, you know, I mean, at that time.
Yeah.
Sure, it could have got bigger and maybe done it then, but it wasn't in that position at the time. And as far as the BMF title, I thought it was great. I think the UFC needed a spark because it was lacking in some areas. It was lacking, and I think that there was no hype around the UFC at the time. And the fact that he brought that BMF title in, I think it was perfect. It was a great idea. And also, too, you couldn't have offered it to two better gangsters, you know, in the sport. I thought it was awesome.
And it was kind of cool too. It was like East Coast, West Coast. It was like,
yeah, it really was. It was the spark. It was the spark that they needed. And on top of not just the spark that they needed, but it was the motive. It was a lot. Like, there was the East Coast, West Coast. There was, you know, two guys that didn't need to talk a lot of shit to each other because they respected each other. I thought it was a good fight.
Then I got two more for you. Then okay. This one's from Cheez-It21, and it's the latest comment. It says, how do you think John Jones will do if he goes up to heavyweight? Do you think he could become champion?
I think he beats Stipe. I think he beats Stipe pretty easily. Outside of, I think Francis Ngannou is probably the only one that I think that could potentially starch him. I think also, too, Anthony Rumble Johnson. I think Anthony Johnson has a good chance of beating him as well, at heavyweight or at 205. So I think those two guys would be the ones that potentially beat him.
And then the last one I got from Early Stoppage MMA, and it says, what's the most satisfying moment of your career?
You know, there's a couple things. I mean, like, for me, there was three things. My most satisfying to me was when I fought Hermes Franca. I was dominating the fight the first two rounds. Going into the third round, I got dropped, was able to survive the rest of the round, ended up finishing the round stronger than he did. And he basically gassed himself out, punching me in the face in the third round. And so when it came down to the actual at the end of the fight, I've always wanted to know if I was a real fighter or if I was a quitter. Somebody that would quit when the time got tough, you know, and just turn over in the fetal position like we see so many guys these days do, and just cover up and let the rest stop it. That never went through my mind. I always wanted to know if I was a real fighter, and then that fight proved to myself. I proved more to myself in that fight that I was a real fighter than anything. So that fight sticks out to me. Obviously, winning my world title against Gil because I was such an underdog. I was 4-1 underdog, and I went out there and dominated the fight. Some judges had it, 44 or 45. It was like 44 or 50. I mean, I dominated every round. So that made me feel good, knowing that I belonged to be at the upper echelon. I always knew I did, but it was just one of those things. There was so much hype around Gil at the time. And then returning back to the UFC with the win over Nate. I mean, that to me was another thing. It was more not even so much the way I beat Nate, but it was the return to the UFC and having a dominant performance like that with the highlight reel knockout. That to me made me feel good. Those are my three that stand out to me in my career.
Those 3 good ones.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming on and taking time every day and talking to me, man.
I appreciate it, man. Hey, hit me up anytime, brother. We'll do it again.
All right, man. Let's do it.
Take it easy, my man.
All right, man. You too.
Bye.